Hello, welcome. We're here today to talk about the rise of the United States as a neo-colonizer, a neo-colonial power, and as a superpower post the World Wars. All right, and by the end of this video, you will be able to explain how the World Wars launched the United States into the position of a neo-colonial power through military spending, big stick policies, and cultural exports. All right, so the question is, how does the United States take over from the United Kingdom as a neo-colonial power? Are global superpowers a thing of the past? Are we seeing a new age of human history? Or are we entering another phase of sharing global power? And how does the U.S. become this in this modern day? All right. If we think back to previous modules, we might remember that Britain, England was enjoying a flourishing in the Victorian era, that there was a sense of pride and patriotism in, for example, going to war, which one can see in this poem by Rupert Brooke, The Soldier, with words like, England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam. England's breathing English air, blessed by sons of home. Again, even in the very wording of this poem, we see a sense of pride and patriotism, nationalism, that England enjoyed during the Victorian era. But this will change. How will this change? Well, World War I brought about a loss of confidence, a sense of despair. There was an entire generation wiped out. The role of women changed during World War I. And we see this evoked in the poem Dulce Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. Words like bloodshed, bloodshod, limped, haunting, coughing, cursed, sludge. The face of war had changed. No longer was it the wearing of patriotic colors, blues and reds, but the colors of war had become browns and greens. Men were fighting from trenches. The conditions were truly awful. And a loss of confidence ensued. So indeed, we can speak of a loss of confidence and a profound change in the diplomatic posture of the United States, which up until this point had been very isolationist. This changes in that the United States begins to enter the world stage and become much more involved in international politics. Basically, this all begins in the late 1800s, 1898 to be specific. The Treaty of Paris basically gave important Spanish territories to the U.S. So, for example, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and the small island of Guam all became dependencies of the United States. So suddenly the U.S. was, again, entering the world stage as a colonial power, much as England had been for centuries. So indeed, up until World War I, the U.S. had long been isolationist, a country unto itself. And American public opinion was strongly in favor of neutrality, not getting involved. But this all changed. By the end of World War I, 1918, the U.S. was seeking to bring reform and democracy. So the idea that the U.S. should and could get involved to spread democratic reform became more predominant. And of course, it's not simply ideology and doing good that drives international politics, but money making. So war actually proved to be very profitable for the United States. Here in this graph, we see that World War I actually devastated many of the countries in Europe. According to the graph here, we see the United Kingdom, Germany, Austria, Russia, and France all suffered to varying degrees during World War I. However, if we look at the line for the United States, not only does it remain static, but there is an upward trend in a gross domestic product. So World War I was actually quite profitable for the United States. And now talking about World War II, well, what was the U.S.'s role? Much like England a century, 150 years ago, the idea was that the U.S. was going to be a savior, an ally, that, the spread of family values, democratic reform, and, a good and healthy way of life was, what the U.S. began to espouse and become known for. And as we see under Democratic President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the nation became a powerful wartime force and an allied force with Britain and the Soviet Union, leading to victory against Nazi Germany. So again, this idea of savior, profit making, but also doing good for the world. So the U.S. becomes a neo-colonizer superpower through military spending and military force, but also what are called big stick policies. So during the final stages of war in the Second World War in 1945, the United States conducted atomic raids, as we know, against Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This was the only time when nuclear weapons have been used in combat, and the effects were devastating. But the show of this kind of military force in nuclear weaponry is what became known as carrying a big stick. Okay, and what about America post World War II? Well, as we see the advent of fast food, entrepreneurship, and business, with McDonald's, for example, sort of an icon of America. In the 1940s and 50s, America became the land of opportunity. Unlike much of Europe, it profited from the wartime and became a formidable superpower militarily, but also, in terms of wealth. So as evidenced in this image, America in the 1950s, became sort of the global standard for healthy democracy, the land of opportunity, economic boom. All is golden and good. And of course, as history teaches us, this too shall change. Also, though, the spread of the power of the U.S. in media, for example, like television, is evidenced in this photo. I vividly remember my father talking about his family being the first on their block in Albany, New York, in the mid-50s to have the first television set, and that the neighbors from around the block and on his street would come to watch the television. Economic boom. Okay, as with all things historical, this does shift. We see a change in the 60s in America in which youth became disillusioned. War was no longer something to aspire to. It was not considered patriotic or a point of pride, but protest began to spread across the country. In the 60s, especially youth movements became very popular, And young people had a stronger voice in rejecting what had become the standard for, the golden role model family and society. And this is also evidenced in serious shakeups in politics and political change. So we began to see in 1954, there had been a system of racial segregation. Black and white pupils, students, attended separate schools in different parts of the United States. In 1954, the Supreme Court declared a new law, legislation, making racial segregation in education unconstitutional. So the idea that children should be learning together and that schools should not be separate was quite a big change. And this brought about a broader change in society and the flourishing of the civil rights movement. And more pivotal, important political change occurred in 1964. New legislation prohibited racial discrimination, not just in schools, but anywhere in public spaces. So no longer on transport like buses, in theaters, in restrooms, in any public area. It was no longer allowed to segregate on the basis of race. So this was a big change in the United States. In this photo, we see the first day of school after the groundbreaking decision in 1954, what all Americans know as Brown versus the Board of Education, in which a court case was won, and legislation deemed that kids would have to be mixed together, combined, no longer segregated in black and white schools. More powerful images of protest, civil rights began to flourish, and Black Americans began to take more of a voice in demanding society change. Here we see Martin Luther King leading a protest movement in the South against segregation. Okay, so far we have seen that the U.S. uses military force and spending, big stick politics like nuclear weaponry. But not only does it use military prowess to exert a global influence, there are more, let's say, less explicit, softer technologies used. How does the United States export its ideas, its way of life, its customs around the world? Well, let's see. Okay, so the United States as a neo-colonizer, well, we see in all these images films, media, games, currency, intelligence, the CIA, the FBI, charitable organizations like the International Monetary Fund, and indeed Microsoft, Apple, the very burgeoning of technology. So there are many other ways that the U.S. has become a predominant global power. Whether these are forces for good or not so good is a matter of debate. And if you're further interested, this hyperlinked video sums everything up in about 8 minutes, which is pretty impressive. Have a watch through it. Okay, and just a bit more extra practice for the theory exam. Let's do just a few questions here and see what you know. Okay, below, again, on the exam, you'll have questions of this type, ranking questions. You need to put the events in order. The Mayflower, the Declaration of Independence, Lincoln was assassinated, the Civil War, and the Boston Tea Party. Take a moment and decide which order things came in. And if you decided, first the Mayflower, the Pilgrims come to the New World, then the Boston Tea Party, right? The American colonists are up in arms about taxes from England in the 1700s. Then we have the Declaration of Independence, where they fought against England and in 1776 signed that declaration. Then a century later, we see war on America's own soil, the Civil War, the North against the South. And just as the war was starting to wane, President Lincoln was assassinated. Okay, when did the Pilgrims arrive on the Mayflower? And the answer is A, 1620. What do Americans celebrate when we signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776? A holiday, a national holiday followed. What holiday is that? And if you guessed the 4th of July, you would be correct. And finally, which of these historical politicians was not one of the founding fathers? Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington, or Benjamin Franklin? And if you guessed Abraham Lincoln, you would be correct. The other three were founding fathers who were present during the designing of, writing of the Declaration of Independence, but Lincoln was not. Okay, thanks for watching, and I hope this video has helped to explain more about the rise of the United States as neo-colonizer and global superpower. Bye for now.